Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Friday, November 21st, 2025, and I'm just going to highlight the Russian steamroller as it gets up and moving in on all areas of the front line. So you may have heard of the Soviet steamroller. Well, the Soviet steamroller basically was the artillery superiority of the Soviet forces against the Nazis, and so they would first set up their line. They would put artillery behind, and then they would just pummel the Nazi forces for sometimes several hours or several days, and then they had so many forces assembled along the front line that the Nazis didn't know exactly where they would be coming from or where to concentrate their forces. So they would do all these deception campaigns. So the Nazis would prepare for an offensive in one area, and they would come in another and catch them by surprise. And they would just do this over and over. So that was the Soviet steamroller, and once the Nazis started getting pushed back, they couldn't set up defensive lines fast enough, so the Russian forces were at speed, as they call it, and so we're starting to see something similar in certain parts of the front line. Of course, the Russians are advancing on all areas. I'm not aware of really any sustained offensive action on the part of the Ukrainian military, and this isn't to glorify violence or glorify one side over the other. It's simply to state the facts on the ground. This was the eventual consequence of a Ukrainian military which had repulsed the Russians trying to obligate the Kiev regime to fulfill the accords of the various agreements they had reached. The Ukrainians basically said, well, they would go to these meetings, they would sign agreements, and then they would go back to Kiev and do the opposite of what they had agreed to. So Russia had sent in a small force, probably about 80,000, certainly not a full-scale invasion. And so then the Ukrainians pushed them back. The Russians were not prepared for that. Most of 2022 was bad for the Russians, but they began to reorganize at the end of the year. And the Ukrainians did their basically last big offensive in the summer of 2023. And they also did the Kursk incursion. The Kursk incursion was to reach the Kursk nuclear power plant. They totally failed. The Russians knew when they saw the troops that were assembled what their goal was, so they set up a defensive line well before the nuclear power plant. And the Ukrainians came close, and then since they weren't able to overcome that defensive line, they tried to go east and west to go around it, and they got into all these natural barriers, forests and rivers, and so they weren't able to move their equipment properly. They had all these floating bridges that they would move in place. They would be there for a day or two, then they'd be destroyed. So they weren't able to sustain any attack. So in the Kursk incursion, it failed. The summer of 2023 offensive was a complete failure. It led to massive destruction, not only of equipment, but also personnel. So it was a total failure. And since then, Russia has come on the offensive. And so now we're seeing that the Ukrainians are running low on soldiers, on equipment, on just about everything. They're sending 60-year-olds to the front line with no training to try to defend the front line, and they're being overrun or they're running for their lives. So Anyway, we see this Russian steamroller advance now in some areas at speed. The Ukrainians aren't able to create a defensive line fast enough before they are hit, and they have to retreat again. So anyway, we have a report here on the Telegram channel of the Ministry of Defense of Russia. And these reports are getting, this is actually a report for a whole week, and it's very wordy. I won't go through all of it, but you'll see this is not the main area where Russia is advancing, but this is the Kharkiv region. Ukraine lost 1,200 troops in that area. In the, is that the Sumy region? Is that the Sumy region? So that must be the Sumy region. In the Kharkiv region, the Ukrainians lost almost 1,600 troops. In the Donetsk People's Republic, under the control of the Yug group of forces, Ukraine lost 1,200 troops. There's the center group of forces, and they're in the what they call the Krasnoarmeysk city, which is Pokrovsk. And so we don't know if we get a okay, we get 1,700 troops were lost or neutralized over the past week. The center group of forces, the enemy losses were more than 3,000. So here is the another group, the Vostok group in the Dnipropetrovsk region and Zaporizhia region. Ukrainian losses were 1,800. In the Dnieper group, the Ukrainian losses were 550. So this has been a very bad week for Ukraine. Russia is now advancing. This steamroller is gaining speed. Now we have some reports here on the different actions. I won't go into that because it'll probably flagged by YouTube as promoting violence or something. So I'll just go into this post by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation leader Andrei Belousov, and you can see the different liberated towns. So Petropavlovka, Novoselivka, Stavki, we have Yampol. So a lot of cities are being taken by the Russian Federation, and Ukraine really doesn't have a response. I'll go over here, see if I can bring up the military summary channel. Okay, here we go. So they have, let me go up here. So here is a video. I'm not going to play it because, again, I'll get flagged. But here we have, if you go to the military summary channel on Telegram, you can watch this video. And so it starts off with some victorious sound and shows the advancing front line as Russian troops advance. The city, Russian forces raise flags in Radizne. Of course, that might have a different name by the Ukrainians, so that gives a room for a lot of confusion. We also see there's a video here about the flag raised in Stavki, flag raised in Novoselivka. So anyway, we have more information about, here's Yampol. So there's a video about the advances in Yampol. It looks like each group has its own kind of video music and video format. And so there's going to be more. Here's, whoops. I don't know if that came up on the screen or not. But anyway, you can see here, Radizne, this area where the Russians are advancing, the Russian steamroller, as I'd like to call it now, moving into the Zaporizhia region, towards Zaporizhia. And the reason why I call it a steamroller is that Russians are advancing so fast that the Ukrainians are not able to set up defensive lines. Of course, they may meet up with some more seriously constructed defensive lines later on, but it may not be manned because the Ukrainian forces are really out of, they're out of recruiting possibilities. So they're kidnapping people off the street. Of course, if they went to Kiev, they would have a whole plethora of young people who are the children of the oligarchs and the politicians, and they could probably create a couple of battalions, but they're not going to do that. These are untouchable people. If they were thinking of mobilizing that group, their families would probably send them, to Spain or, to some other country where they would not be mobilized. So those are kind of the untouchable people. Once they get to that group, it'll probably be when they just are absolutely out of any possibility. But right now they're mobilizing 60-year-olds. Imagine that, being 60-year-old and you're practically into your retirement years. You're being pulled out of that to be chased down by a bunch of drones, and so that's not a very nice way to live out your retirement. But anyway, I just wanted to point out to you, at least in some specific areas, especially here towards Zaporizhia, we're starting to see the Russian steamroller move along, and every day we're hearing about one, two, or three villages that are being what they call liberated. The Russian forces have taken it completely and secured it. So anyway, that is my video about the Russian steamroller. If you have any comments to make, please leave it below. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, which may be soon, depending on what's going on in the world. But anyway, thank you for joining me and for being a part of this channel. And I look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye-bye.